when we hear there's a 5 o'clock press conference, a sort of heart sink. Oh God, what's going to be announced? But actually, it was pretty encouraging in terms of the statistics. I mean, lots of statistics, by the way, freely available at all times. People who want to look for them. I wish some members of the media would bother a lot of the time. But we had a record number of infections, 218,000, passing that 200,000 mark. But we are testing literally millions of people. So I'm not sure anyone should be surprised by that. But the Prime Minister planning at the current time no new restrictions, riding out the Omicron wave. Do you think he's finally, for the first time in quite a long time, following the science?
I think so, absolutely. The evidence is that Omicron is giving milder disease. You look back to mid-September, about the 15th, 16th September, that's when we shot up from 50,000 cases a day to now well over 100, indeed now 200,000 cases a day. But the rate of deaths has not increased, even 3 weeks on from that major shift point on the case number curve. So that's good news. It ties in with the South African experience as well. It ties in with experimental work showing that Omicron is less able to infect lung cells, work showing that from both Hong Kong and Cambridge. So this is following the science, at least in terms of not imposing further restrictions. Lost the sound. I can't hear you. I can't hear you.
Apologies. I think I put myself on mute, which is the first time I've done that. I think my husband would love me to discover that button in real life, but there we are. I'm sorry, I have to go on mute when I want to cough, I'm afraid. Apologies for that. I mean, this is the situation where we've, an awful lot of medics and scientists who've been advising the government seem to be constantly calling for more restrictions and only showing the government the data which or the modelling which would suggest that restrictions are necessary. And then we're told, well, actually, look, people have changed their behaviour, so we don't need to have those restrictions. But we always knew that people would always change their behaviour. We saw even in March 2020 that people had already voluntarily adjusted their behaviour, as they did before last Christmas and this Christmas as well, which is that people are very sensible, got a lot of common sense, they care about themselves and their loved ones' health, particularly their vulnerable elderly relatives, and they do the sensible thing. They don't go to a wild party 2 days before they're going to visit grandma. People can make these decisions for themselves. They just need to be given the right advice and the right information, and then you don't need to have mandated rules.
Absolutely. I mean, Sweden demonstrated that in the spring of 2020, and latterly Florida has demonstrated it in the United States. In each case, country, that state, has had no worse outcomes than other states and countries which have imposed strict lockdowns.
Well, indeed, and particularly for Sweden, the international data is very clear. They not only they've had no worse outcomes than those countries in terms of their COVID deaths, but they've had much better outcomes on every other measure, not just economically, but that does have huge implications long term for people's health, but also in terms of other excess deaths. And we're seeing the fallout of this at the moment. We've got here, 17 hospitals in just the Greater Manchester area alone suspending some of their non-urgent surgery. And I'm thinking, what, this is news? They basically did that for about a year. From 2020.
I think a lot of this is staff absences as being contacts of family members with COVID. Yeah. A lot of those staff with no symptoms whatsoever. This is crazy that the operation of those hospitals is being disrupted to the extent it is. Schools also. I mean, schools in Sweden did not close at all right through the pandemic. The children have not been masked in Sweden, and Swedish children and their teachers have not been dropping like flies. What's being done here, or has been done here, is being done here, has been dreadfully disruptive to education and for no benefit.
Indeed. I mean, that's the thing. We were constantly told, well, look, it's just a piece of cloth, or it's just a little bit of time off to save lives. Well, it doesn't save lives, and it's not just a piece of cloth. I mean, just on the issue, lots of children were going back yesterday, but again, normally there's inset days. Today is going to be a big day for kids to return to school in England, certainly. being told it's guidance. It's not the law. It is guidance going out to schools that children in secondary schools should wear masks, not just in communal areas, as was already guidance, but in the classroom as well. I've given my daughter an exemption. Look, if she at 15 chooses to wear a mask, then she can choose to wear a mask. I'm not there to police it, but I don't want her to wear a mask. It serves no purpose whatsoever. I think they're deeply, deeply physically and emotionally and mentally damaging for children. Well, I think for adults as well, but for children to wear as well. But have you? I mean, you're a professor of medical microbiology. Have you seen any evidence that suggests that either these flimsy paper masks or the cloth masks that most people wear make a blind bit of difference?
I'm far from convinced that they do any good at all. You look at countries where mask mandates of one sort or another have been imposed. There's been no change on the trend curve for infections and hospitalizations. Even parts of Germany which mandated high-grade medical masks showed no difference to trend in other parts of Germany where they weren't mandating high-grade medical masks. Yes, you can set up a laboratory experiment which seems to show some advantage, but when it translates to the real, it doesn't translate to the real world. The randomized trial that was done in Denmark, getting people to wear masks or not, showed a statistically insignificant reduction in infections. Yeah. There's been a trial in Bangladesh which claimed to show a bigger effect, but when you went to the raw numbers in that trial, the difference in numbers of infections between the masked and the unmasked was tiny. I think it was about 20 in 300,000 people recruited and 1,000 odd infections in each side of the trial. Tiny difference.
And this is it. We're constantly told the science is really clear. I mean, it really isn't. It is not. And then there's an idea. Oh well, it doesn't really make much difference. It's not the same as, say, closing down a pub or restricting people going to school. But we know that masks are a symbol of doing something, aren't they? They're very much now used, I think, just as a symbol of I'm a good person because I'm wearing one.
It's symbolism, but it's also a constraint on communication. It's a constraint on being able to read somebody's face. There's one of the banks, I can't remember now if it's Halifax or NatWest, has still got a few posters up from October, November saying it's a friendly face thing. Come in and have a talk with us. Yes, well, exactly. It's a friendly face thing. And if you've got a bloody mask on, you can't see whether somebody's face or somebody's got a bloody mask on. You can't see if their face is friendly or unfriendly.
Absolutely. It's really clear, isn't it? In terms of where we are going from now on, the Prime Minister has warned that he feels that parts of the NHS will feel temporarily overwhelmed. And again, that doesn't appear to be coming from a massive increase in cases of hospitalizations. We know that we are seeing far, far, far fewer people going into hospital compared to the number of infections, and indeed the number of people going into intensive care. That's half that of the peak 12 months ago, just 5% on ventilators. And we know that people who are getting ill with Omicron are in hospital for a much shorter time as well. We know 33% of those who are in hospital with COVID aren't being treated for COVID. They just happen to have COVID while they're being treated for something else. And a huge number of those people also caught COVID whilst in hospital, which is rather crucial. And that is now well documented. Most of the overwhelming of the NHS appears to be coming from mass testing and mass isolation. Do you think we should change our testing rules and our isolation rules? Some countries are changing it down from 10 days to 7 days if you've got some negative lateral flow tests. Some countries have gone down to 5 days, but it depends when you count the isolation from. Is it from symptoms? Is it from the day of the test? What do you think we should do to try and resolve that side of the crisis?
I think we should treat Omicron, which is now the prevalent variant, as we do any other common cold. That if you are symptomatic, get a test, see if it's COVID or not. If you're not symptomatic, there is really no good reason to be tested, except if maybe you think you're going to go see Granny the following day or something like that. Then it may be prudent.
Okay, what about the argument though that, well, my daughter doesn't need to get tested to go to school. She's not at risk. Kids aren't at risk. The teachers are boosted. If the teacher's so concerned that it isn't boosted, then well, I'm sorry, that's not really my problem. But what if one of the children she sits next to, she's not been tested. We don't know that she got COVID or not, and then the child she's sitting next to gets it from her, and the child she's sitting next to lives with Granny. What about that
Well,
argument?
well, despite everything that's been done, it's estimated that well over 50% of children have now had COVID. The circulating variant Omicron is associated with milder infections. Sweden has not had this mad scheme of testing every child twice a week and so on and so forth. And as we've said already, Sweden has not had mountainous numbers of,
Yeah.
of deaths among children and their teachers.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very good point. Whenever we talk about the what ifs, well, we know what the what ifs are. We've had a control group in both places like Florida and Texas and in Sweden, and of course even in the UK in terms of even the Plan B restrictions and what's happening in England. We've got the
I mean,
control
put
groups of
brutally
Scotland and
again,
Wales.
your daughter at some stage is inevitably going to get COVID.
No,
We
she's had it
all are.
twice. She's
Well,
had it twice.
then
I've
she
been
should be.
remarkably relaxed about it.
She, then,
I'm on my
then
second bout.
then she and you are clearly doing well. You're building what's the basis of a robust immunity, such as we all have to force circulating coronaviruses. And frankly, the boosters, which are now being doled out willy-nilly to everybody, are only giving about 10 weeks protection.
Yeah.
My view is that these boosters are vitally important for the vulnerable and the elderly, but the way they are being used now is reckless. That these are vaccines which are leaky against the prevalent variant, Omicron. They're not giving good coverage. They're giving brief protection, and they're putting a pressure on that variant to evolve further and to evolve unpredictably. Frankly, we've got the virus now where we want it, with a less virulent variant. Let's keep it that way, and let's build up as much natural immunity as we possibly can. Protect the
Professor
vulnerable.
David Livermore, always good to talk to you, sir. Professor of Medical Microbiology at the University of East Anglia. Thank you very much indeed.